Oaxaca, you said?
I'm returning to my home.
I'm also headed to Oaxaca. What are you running from?
I'm not running. Why'd you cover for me?
I need your guidance.
There's a main highway.
I don't have a passport. Listen.
Maria.
Maria, listen, Maria. I think we may be able to help each other.
Doubtful. It doesn't appear I'll be receiving a bath, so I should get going.
I'll pay.
I'm not for hire.
That was an excerpt from a script I began writing as a culmination of research on late 18th century Mexico. Let me set the stage. During the colonial period, biopirates from the European continent, motivated by greed and glory, fought to disrupt imperial monopolies over natural resources, claiming flora and fauna for their own home countries. Meanwhile, indigenous and black women would inflict abortions upon themselves using a particular native plant, the peacock flower, to avoid bringing children into the world that was the European colonies. I came across these anecdotes in a lecture on colonial medicine a couple years ago. What stuck out to me was this contrast between two very disparate uses of the earth, theft of natural resources for imperialist economic gain versus the sparing of a child from the colonial reality for people of color. The story I originally conceived of for this project involved a reimagining of an actual biopirate's quest for the cochineal beetle, a Mexican native and Spanish monopolized insect deeply valued for its crimson dye. In my conceit, this French botanist, Nicolas Joseph Thierry de Menonville, encounters a pregnant indigenous woman, Zianya Maria Guerrero, who has the same waypoint as him. Both fugitives of sorts, the two team up to travel from Veracruz to Oaxaca, learning about each other's relationships with the earth, one passionate but commercial, and the other deeply spiritual, along the way. It was to be a story about colonialism, environmentalism, identity, and betrayal. I drew initially from Thierry de Menonville's own 130-ish page account of his quest for the beetle, and accounts of enslaved women using the peacock flower to induce abortions in the Caribbean. I wanted to dramatize these two stories and pose them across from one another. But my first step before I could tackle an original story set in a historical period was research. Lots and lots of research. In my initial proposal, I was focused on a magical realist retelling of Thierry de Menonville's first-person account traveling through colonial Mexico. It's a fascinating text. It was the magnificence of nature and the darkness that results when one assumes ownership of it that originally captured me. But it's a story told through a particular lens in a particular manner. Linda Tahiuai Smith, in her discussion of colonialism in the standard historical canon, notes that, quote, travelers' stories were generally the experiences and observations of white men whose interactions with indigenous societies or people were constructed around their own cultural views, end quote. I sensed from the get-go that Thierry de Menonville's journal perhaps told me more about him and the popular 18th century European perspective more generally than it did about true historical events. Something I'd been struggling with since the project's inception was how to adapt a story about colonialism told from a narrow perspective, and a colonizing white man's perspective at that. Early in the research process, as I began to formally address this, I reached a crossroads. How, if Thierry de Menonville is my protagonist, do I center with integrity a white man in a story fraught with the racism, entitlement, and violence of white men? How do I, as a white woman, write a story about colonialism that doesn't merely regurgitate more colonialist ideology into the present-day canon? The answer to the first question I quickly found is that I don't. The answer to the second came with more time, patience, and intellectual development. I had encountered but had limited formal experience with decolonialism prior to this endeavor. I understood the concept and was familiar with its agenda to write back against the ongoing colonial mentalities ingrained in our societal institutions and bodies of knowledge, but wasn't sure where to start learning more. I'm incredibly thankful for my mentor, Dr. Eileen Robinson's reading recommendations, Tahiuai Smith's decolonizing methodologies, and Walter D. Mignolo's on decoloniality and the darker side of Western modernity, among others, which both challenged my default perspective on research and history and informed the manner in which I conducted my own research. I feel, for example, I have been particularly thoughtful in my selection of authors while pulling texts, something I dedicated less concern to in the past. Thinking critically about where I'm getting my information and from whom has bolstered my confidence in my research Bible. It has rendered my research richer, more nuanced, and, to put it simply, more honest. Speaking of the research Bible, let's take a look at what I came away with. Once I had this substantial backdrop against which to work, I began constructing a premise for the story. First, I needed to identify my central protagonist. Enter Xania Maria Guerrero, a 19-year-old Mixtec woman from Oaxaca who lives on an estate with her husband where they make a living as farmhands. While accompanying a group of merchants as their guide to Veracruz, Xania is raped. Upon reaching Veracruz, she eliminates her attacker and tears off from the group of men, now a lone traveling woman on her way back to Oaxaca, seeking the abortive peacock flower along the way. Soon into her journey, Xania crosses paths with Nicolas Joseph Thierry de Menonville, a frivolous Frenchman with a passion for botany. He's been sent by the French crown to steal the cochineal insect from Oaxaca. Cocky and conceited, but, to his credit, bold and driven, he's got a stereotypical weakness for riches and beautiful women. Both capable of helping the other in their own unique ways, protagonist and antagonist join forces to travel across Mexico. After establishing my central characters, I took the synopsis that I'd written up of Thierry de Menonville's actual account and added to, removed from, adjusted, and rewrote this to be Xania's story, with Thierry de Menonville's journey as the scaffolding. This manifested in a complete plot treatment, a prose synopsis of the plot points for the eventual script. I selected Act 1 from this prose treatment to start and broke the synopsis down further into a beat sheet of every plot movement split into scenes. It's with this thorough planning in place that I began actually screenwriting.
You followed me.
Yes, I did, but let me
Where's my brooch?
Yes, I followed you. I also saved your life, for a second time. Cesalpinia pulcherrima, the peacock flower.
You're familiar.
A beautiful flower, with deadly potential. Surely you know.
What do you want?
I need to get to Oaxaca.
You said that already. Why?
There's the plant, the nopal cactus.
You're a thief.
I'm a collector, an appreciator of nature, a man of science.
Why me?
I was forbade from leaving Veracruz. I'm suspected of piracy, the Spanish and their resources.
It appears they're right to suspect you.
I'm assuming you're not planning on taking the main highways either. As you're a native woman on her own packing a knife and a pouch full of silver, neither of which, I presume of the money, is yours. And I'm assuming when you do pass through towns, as I'm certain you must at some point, you'll attract far fewer glances if accompanied by a well-dressed European man. I can help you get home safely. You can introduce me to the cactus.
What do you want with it?
For my personal collection.
Through writing the first act, I was forced to make some decisions regarding my concern that I may not have what it takes to write this story on my own. Though in writing this story, I'm able to present my own perspective on identity, colonialism, and its consequences, I know such a topic would benefit from being handled collaboratively and with the input of the identities whom I seek to represent. Thus, after finishing a draft of Act 1, I decided to transition away from the script itself, instead suggesting it as a starting point of what could be the culmination of a more collaborative creative process. Meanwhile, I've dedicated my efforts to consolidating my research and creative underpinnings into an interactive online experience, a digital essay of sorts, exploring the world of late colonial Mexico, the story I've imagined within it, and the present-day reverberations of such a story. Check out my site to learn more about Xania, Nicholas, their world, and how to get involved in furthering their story. Thanks for watching!